On the 11th of May 1985, spectators at a football match in Bradford, England, noticed something odd. Thin wisps of smoke were curling up from underneath the stands on which they sat. Looking down through a gap in the floorboards, they could see a faint orange glow, a small, smouldering fire. One spectator ran to fetch a fire extinguisher, while another poured his and his son's drink down through a gap to try and quench the flames. Around them, other spectators continued to cheer. The players continued to play. The fire was a minor one. It would surely be dealt with the moment an extinguisher was found, and they could return to watching the match in peace. Nobody present realized that, within less than 5 minutes, thousands of people would be screaming, burning, and running for their lives. The Valley Parade Football Stadium in Bradford, England, now known as the University of Bradford Stadium, has a long history. The sports ground dates back to 1886, when it was established for a local rugby club, before being taken over in the early 1900s by Bradford City Football Club. In its early years, the club did well, and it was soon decided that the ground required an update to reflect the ever-increasing status of the team, not to mention the growing number of fans. In 1908, a series of upgrades began, including the construction of a main stand to seat around 5,000 fans and accommodate 7,000 more in a standing-only area at the front. The stands were made mostly of wood, constructed on top of an existing hill at one edge of the pitch. Wooden beams were set into the hillside, supporting wooden floorboards and seating. Above and to the rear were narrow corridors leading to turnstiles for entry and exit. The whole thing was covered, in case of inclement weather, by a roof supported on metal pillars and coated with roofing felt soaked in bitumen. The new stand, by virtue of being weatherproof, was a considerable improvement, but it was only ever intended to be a temporary structure. Though the future of the club looked as though it could be bright, nothing was certain. Temporary wooden stands were considered a wise investment, as they could be disassembled and moved if the club had to move to a new city. If Valley Parade remained their home and they continued to grow, the stands would be replaced by more permanent ones in the future. The club did indeed thrive, but improvements to the main stand were delayed again and again. One world war and then another diverted resources, and funds were later spent on other necessary developments, such as changing rooms, offices, and the installation of floodlights. Replacing the main stands would be costly, complex, and disruptive, and so the same wooden structure that was put in place in the early 1900s remained in use until the 1980s with only minor modifications, such as the addition of plastic seats to fill out the standing area. It was only in the 1980s that it was finally considered feasible to replace the main stand. The club's finances were in good shape and funds could be made available for a much improved metal and concrete structure to replace the ancient wooden main stand. This was all the more urgent as the club had received several warnings from visiting engineers and from West Yorkshire Fire Brigade that the existing stands were outdated and posed a fire risk. The fire risk arose both from how narrow some of the turnstiles and exits were and the fact that the space under the stands was inaccessible and could not be cleaned out. Over time, a huge quantity of litter had built up under the stands, much of it flammable. This, combined with the wooden construction of the stands, was a serious hazard. The 1985 season, then, would be one of the last that spectators were seated in the creaky old main stand. 2 days after the last game, demolition would begin, and in the weeks that followed, 3 seasons' worth of maintenance budget would be expended on a new, modern stand. When Bradford City supporters flocked to their home grounds for the final game in the old stadium on the 11th of May 1985, many were in high spirits. They were there to watch their team play Lincoln City, but the match was considered a little bit of a formality. Bradford had already decisively won the 3rd Division Championship, and were thus to be promoted. Before the match even began, there was a parade, and their captain was presented with a trophy. It was a good-natured and celebratory fixture. Fans were there in force to cheer on their team for one final extra victory, and to celebrate a season of success. As exciting as this prospect was, the game itself was rather dull. The result of this match wouldn't change anything for either team, and so the players approached the match in a relaxed fashion. Nobody scored for the majority of the first half. At 3:40 p.m, just 5 minutes before half-time, the faint glow of a fire was spotted in the main stand. When a thin stream of smoke emerged from beneath the stands, fans poured their drinks down through the gap to try and damp down any smouldering, and also alerted a nearby police officer. Very quickly, however, what started as a smouldering burn became a fully fledged fire. Television commentator John Helm noticed the glow of the flames. As commotion in the stands increased, players on the pitch hesitated. The game petered out, and Mr. Helm began commentating on the rapidly spreading fire, images of which were also captured by television cameras.
And we've actually got a fire in the stand on the far side of the ground. And that looks very nasty indeed. Now the police have gone over there to try and quell the fire, and they're frantically getting some of the supporters out.
Fans further along the stand saw smoke in the air but thought little of it. Smoke bombs were often thrown by rowdy fans during matches. One had been thrown during the parade at the start of this very match, in fact. A little smoke was not a cause for concern. Even when some felt the floorboards beneath their feet growing warm, they did not know how to react. John Helm continued,
Now these are extraordinary scenes at Valley Parade. It's supposed to be a day of celebration. One hopes the stand doesn't burn down. And the game has obviously had to stop. I saw the smoke about a minute ago, but now that fire is beginning to rage.
Police and fans searched for fire extinguishers, but none were available. The only extinguishers were kept in the clubhouse, as those left in public areas were prone to vandalism. As the smoke and fire swelled, the fire brigade was called. Some firefighters were already on site, collecting money for a planned charity match. By lucky chance, fire hoses were also available, having been used a few days ago to water the pitch. Firefighters ran to try and connect these to hydrants outside the stadium, but soon realised these efforts were futile, and turned to helping fleeing fans over the barriers instead.
And the police are doing a tremendous job in getting people out of the stand and onto the pitch. But a day of triumph could turn into a day of disaster here for Bradford. These quite astonishing scenes, and I've just seen the police leading a couple of people out of the ground. And the smoke is now engulfing the pitch at one end. As that blaze grows, the stand has to be in jeopardy. And the 2,500 people in that stand are panicking. They are frantic to get out.
Many people evacuated onto the pitch, the clearest and most direct route to safety. But to get clear of the stands required navigating a crowd, climbing a concrete barrier, and managing a drop of around 2.4 metres or 8 feet in places. Daunted by this, or wishing to evacuate along a route that was more familiar to them, hundreds of people tried to leave the way they had come in. This resulted in a panicked crush in the single long corridor behind the stands. Some exits were boarded up and not in use, or else closed or secured by an unlocked bolt. It was standard practice to lock exits during the first half of any game to prevent fans sneaking in without tickets. But fortunately, in this case, most exits were either already open or gave way when forced by fans. Terrified fans streamed out of the stadium, but thousands still remained trapped inside.
And these are disastrous scenes for the club. One can feel the heat. And that is a catastrophic sight for Bradford City Football Club. The whole stand is going up in flames, and that person there looks to be burning. And the timbers are coming down onto the ground, and this is horrific. There is no cause for celebration for anybody here. This is awful.
The fire spread unbelievably quickly. From a faint glow to the entire stand being consumed took just 256 seconds. The failure of the burning roof was so rapid that some fans did not even manage to leave their seats before they were killed by a fall of burning roofing felt. Elsewhere, people spilled onto the pitch and passed out from smoke inhalation, or left the stands with their hair and clothes on fire. But even as all this happened, some fans watching from other, unaffected stands did not grasp the severity of what was happening. They sang, cheered, and chanted. An initial chorus of "Bradford's burning" gave way to general cheers and jeers, and many spectators were seen smiling and waving to the cameras, unaware that fans had just burned to death on the other side of the stadium from them. Hours later, the fire burned itself out, and police and firefighters worked through the night to recover bodies. In total, the Bradford City Stadium fire claimed the lives of 56 people, and caused serious injury to a further 265. One child, 12-year-old Martin Fletcher, made an extremely narrow escape. He was caught in a crowd crush with his family in the corridor behind the stands, but due to his small size was able to escape and flee down onto the pitch. He suffered serious injuries as the heat melted his baseball cap to his scalp, but he survived. The rest of his family did not. Many survivors were left with serious injuries that took months, if not years, to heal, and generally resulted in permanent scars. Their ongoing treatment led to the establishment of the Bradford Burns Unit, where, at one time, 1 in 10 plastic surgeons in the UK were working to address scarring and injuries. The number of burn injuries to hands led to the invention of the Bradford sling by Professor David Sharp at the Bradford Royal Infirmary. This new type of sling offered support while also providing even pressure around the limb, and is used for hand injuries to this day. Following an investigation into the cause of the fire, a total halt was placed on the construction of all wooden stands in large football stadiums, and venues with wooden seating that might pose a fire risk were instructed to close those stands and replace them. Further, smoking was banned at any football ground with wooden stands of any kind. The film of the fire was initially broadcast uncensored on television, disseminating images that shocked the nation, including footage of fans on fire as they fled the stands. It was not broadcast again, but is still used on a regular basis during fire safety training courses. Horrific though it is, there is no better illustration of just how quickly a fire, once started, can spread.